behind the golden gates of Kensington Palace, beneath the watchful eyes of millions around the world, a moment occurred that would forever alter the course of royal history. It wasn't a grand announcement or a public declaration that made headlines. Instead, it was three simple words whispered in the quiet of a hospital corridor that would transform two lives and touch the hearts of an entire nation. What could Prince William have possibly said to Catherine during her darkest hour that gave her the strength to face the unthinkable? What secret words held such power that they not only saved a marriage but revealed the true meaning of unconditional love? This is the story of a whisper that became a roar, of vulnerability that became strength, and of two people who discovered that even in the shadow of a crown, authentic love can conquer the deepest fears. But you've never seen before. Raw, real, and utterly human. The truth behind those three words will leave you believing in the transformative power of love all over again. The morning rain drummed against the windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine Middleton stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. Dark circles shadowed her once bright eyes, and her hands trembled as she attempted to apply concealer to hide the evidence of another sleepless night. It had been 3 months since the diagnosis that changed everything. 3 months since the words, precancerous cells, had echoed in the sterile walls of a private medical facility. 3 months since her world had tilted on its axis, and she began to question everything she thought she knew about her future. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, married to the future King of England, living in a palace surrounded by the finest medical care money could buy, yet feeling more vulnerable and alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. The weight of the crown she would one day wear seemed insignificant compared to the weight of uncertainty that now pressed down on her shoulders every morning when she woke. Catherine had always been the strong one. Even during their university days at St. Andrews, William had relied on her steady presence, her ability to remain calm under pressure, her gift for seeing the positive in any situation. She was the one who had adapted to royal protocol with grace, who had learned to smile through endless public engagements, who had managed to balance being a mother, a wife, and a future queen without ever showing the strain. But this was different. This was her body betraying her, her own cells turning against her in a way that felt deeply personal and terrifying. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic, speaking in careful medical terms about treatment options and survival rates. But Catherine heard what they weren't saying in their measured tones and professional smiles. The palace staff moved around her with their usual efficiency, preparing for another day of royal duties. Lady Susan, her private secretary, knocked gently on the door before entering with a tablet displaying the day's schedule. 3 public engagements, a charity luncheon, and a private meeting with the Board of Trustees for one of her patronages. Your Royal Highness, the car will be ready in 30 minutes for your first appointment, Lady Susan said softly. Her eyes filled with the same concern that Catherine had been seeing in everyone's faces lately. Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She had become an expert at maintaining her composure in public, but the effort was becoming exhausting. Each smile felt forced, each conversation felt like a performance, and each photograph felt like a lie. As she descended the grand staircase of Kensington Palace, Catherine's mind wandered to William. He had left early that morning for an official visit to Wales, and she hadn't wanted to wake him to say goodbye. Their conversations had become stilted lately, filled with careful words and unspoken fears. They were both trying so hard to be strong for each other that they had forgotten how to be honest. William was struggling too, though he tried to hide it. She could see it in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, as if he was memorizing her face. She could hear it in his voice when he spoke to the children, a forced brightness that didn't quite ring true. The man who had once been so confident, so sure of his place in the world, now seemed lost in the face of something he couldn't fix or control. The first engagement of the day was at a children's hospital, one of Catherine's favorite types of events. Normally, being around sick children and their families filled her with purpose and reminded her of why her royal duties mattered. Today, walking through the pediatric oncology ward, she felt like a fraud. A 7-year-old girl named Emma approached her with a handmade card. Emma was bald from chemotherapy treatments, but her smile was radiant as she presented her gift to the Duchess. The card was covered in glitter and featured a drawing of a princess with a crown. "I drew this for you because my mummy says you're brave like a princess," Emma said, her small voice filled with admiration. Catherine knelt down to Emma's level, accepting the card with hands that she willed not to shake. Looking into this child's innocent eyes, seeing her strength and courage in the face of a battle far more serious than Catherine's own situation, she felt a profound shift in perspective. "Thank you, Emma. This is beautiful," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "You know what? I think you're the brave one here, Bree. You're the real princess." As they spoke, Catherine learned about Emma's treatment journey. The little girl spoke matter-of-factly about her chemotherapy sessions, her good days and bad days, and her dreams of becoming a doctor when she grew up so she could help other sick children. "Sometimes I get scared," Emma admitted quietly. "But my daddy tells me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you need to do even when you are scared." Those words hit Catherine like a physical blow. Here was a child facing a life-threatening illness with more courage and wisdom than Catherine had been able to muster in her own situation. Emma's simple truth about bravery resonated in a way that all the carefully crafted words from doctors and counselors had not. The rest of the hospital visit passed in a blur of meetings with medical staff and families. Catherine found herself really listening to their stories, not just nodding politely as she sometimes did during particularly emotional encounters. She heard about parents who had given up careers to care for sick children, siblings who had learned to be caregivers before they were even teenagers, and medical staff who chose hope every single day despite the heartbreak that was an inevitable part of their work. Dr. Patricia Williams, the head of the oncology department, walked Catherine through the new wing that was being funded partially through one of her charitable initiatives. As they talked about the advanced treatment options that would be available to young patients, Dr. Williams shared her own philosophy about dealing with serious illness. "The human body is remarkably resilient, Dr. Salo," Williams explained, as they stood in what would become a family counseling room. "But I've learned that healing isn't just about the physical treatment. It's about maintaining hope, staying connected to the people you love, and finding meaning in the journey, even when the destination is uncertain." Catherine found herself opening up to Dr. Williams in a way she hadn't with anyone since her diagnosis. Perhaps it was the doctor's calm competence, or maybe it was the way she spoke about illness as just another part of the human experience rather than as a tragedy or failure. "How do you help families cope when the prognosis isn't good?" Catherine asked, thinking not just about the families they served, but about her own situation. "We focus on what they can control," Dr. B. Williams replied. "They can't control the cancer, but they can control how they choose to spend their time, how they talk to their children, how they support each other. We help them understand that love and connection are the most powerful medicines we have." As Catherine left the hospital that afternoon, Emma's words and Dr. Williams' wisdom swirled in her mind. She realized that she had been so focused on the fear of what might happen that she had stopped living in the present moment. That she had been so worried about being strong for everyone else that she had forgotten to be honest about her own needs and fears. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave her time to think. She watched London pass by through the tinted windows of her official car, seeing the city with fresh eyes. People hurried along sidewalks, lost in their own daily dramas and challenges. Everyone was carrying something, she realized. Everyone had their own version of facing the unknown. When she arrived back at the palace, Catherine made an impulsive decision. Instead of going straight to her private apartments, she walked to William's study. She knew he wouldn't be back from Wales until evening, but she needed to be in his space, surrounded by his presence. The study was quintessentially William. Books about environmental conservation were stacked next to briefing papers about his upcoming royal engagements. Photographs of their children were scattered across his desk alongside official correspondence. A half-finished cup of tea sat on a coaster, evidence of his hurried departure that morning. Catherine sat in his chair and opened her laptop. For the first time since her diagnosis, she began to write. Not official correspondence or speech notes, but her honest thoughts about what she was experiencing. She wrote about her fears, her anger, her grief for the future she had imagined, wrote about feeling like she was failing everyone who depended on her, and about the loneliness of trying to be strong when all she wanted was to fall apart. As the afternoon light faded into evening, Catherine continued writing. She wrote about Emma and her wisdom about bravery. She wrote about Dr. Williams and her insights about resilience. She wrote about the love she felt for William and their children, and how that love was both her greatest strength and her deepest vulnerability. When she finally looked up from her laptop, the study was dark except for the lamp beside William's desk. She could hear his voice in the hallway speaking with one of his private secretaries about the day's events in Wales. Her heart began to race. Not from fear this time, but from anticipation. William appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled from the long day. When he saw her sitting at his desk, his expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Kate, what are you doing here? How did today go?" She looked at him across the room. This man she had loved for over a decade and made another impulsive decision. Instead of giving him the usual report about successful engagements and positive public reactions, she told him the truth. "I'm scared, William," she said simply. "I'm really, really scared, and I don't want to pretend that I'm not anymore." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though it was probably only seconds. William's expression went through a series of changes: surprise, relief, and something that looked almost like gratitude. He crossed the room and knelt beside the chair where she was sitting. "Thank God," he whispered. "I was beginning to think I was the only one falling apart." For the first time in months, Catherine laughed. It wasn't a polite royal laugh designed for public consumption. It was real and raw and filled with all the emotions she had been holding back. "You're falling apart too?" she asked. "Completely," William admitted. "I've been trying so hard to be strong for you that I forgot you might need me to be human instead." They sat together in the darkening study, and for the first time since the diagnosis, they began to really talk. Not about schedules and medical appointments and public responsibilities, but about their fears and their love and their hope that somehow together they would find their way through this challenge. As the evening deepened around them, Catherine realized that this conversation was the beginning of something new, not just a new phase of her treatment, but a new understanding of what it meant to be truly intimate with another person. She had spent so long trying to protect William from her fears that she had forgotten they were supposed to face life's challenges together. The conversation continued late into the night, moving from William's study to their private sitting room where they curled up together on the sofa like they had during their university days. They talked about everything and nothing, making up for months of careful conversations and polite evasions. When they finally went to bed, Catherine felt lighter than she had in months. Uncertainty about her medical situation hadn't changed, but something fundamental had shifted in how she thought about facing it. She wasn't alone in this journey, and she didn't have to be perfect or strong or royal every moment of every day. As she drifted off to sleep with William's arm around her, Catherine thought about what Dr. Williams had said about focusing on what you can control. And she couldn't control her cells or guarantee her future, but she could control how honest she was with the people she loved. She could control whether she chose to face this challenge with grace or with fear. For the first time in 3 months, she chose grace. And tomorrow, she would choose it again. The following morning brought a sense of calm that Catherine hadn't experienced in months. She woke before her alarm, not from anxiety this time, but from a genuine feeling of rest. William was already up, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the palace gardens in shades of gold and pink. "Good morning," she said softly, and when he turned to smile at her, she saw something in his eyes that had been missing for weeks. The careful worry was still there, but underneath it was the warmth and love that had first drawn her to him all those years ago at university.
"How are you feeling?" he asked, and for once the question didn't feel loaded with unspoken fears.
"Different," Catherine answered honestly. "Better, I think. Clearer." They shared breakfast in their private dining room, a luxury they rarely afforded themselves given their packed schedules. Catherine found herself really tasting her food for the first time in weeks, noticing the sweetness of the strawberries and the richness of the coffee. It was as if admitting her fear had awakened other senses that had been dulled by anxiety. Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock. Lady Susan entered with the morning briefings and a concerned expression. "Your Royal Highness, I need to discuss today's schedule. The press office has received several calls asking about your health. There seem to be rumors circulating about why you've looked tired in recent photographs." Catherine felt her stomach drop. This was her worst fear realized, that her personal struggle would become public fodder, analyzed and dissected by strangers who felt entitled to know every detail of her life. William reached across the table and took her hand. "What kind of rumors?" he asked Lady Susan. "Nothing specific yet, but there's speculation about everything, from pregnancy to marital problems. The press office wants to know how you'd like them to respond. Catherine looked at William, and in that moment they had an entire conversation without words. She could see he was leaving the decision entirely up to her, that he would support whatever choice she made about how much of their private struggle to make public. "Tell them I'm dealing with a minor health matter that's being monitored by my medical team," Catherine said finally. Nothing more for now. After Lady Susan left, William squeezed Catherine's hand. "Are you sure about that?" "We could say more or less, whatever you're comfortable with." "I need more time to figure out how I want to handle this," Catherine said. "Yesterday, talking to you, talking to Emma, and Dr. Williams, it made me realize I'd been approaching everything wrong. I'd been trying to be the person I think everyone needs me to be instead of figuring out who I actually am in this situation." The day's engagements proceeded more smoothly than they had in weeks. Catherine found that the honesty she had shared with William the night before had somehow freed her to be more present during her public duties. At a school visit in South London, she sat on tiny chairs and listened to 8-year-olds read their creative stories with genuine enthusiasm rather than polite attention. One story particularly caught her attention. A girl named Aisha had written about a queen who lost her crown in a storm and had to learn to be brave without it. The story was simple, told in the straightforward way children approach complex emotions, but it resonated deeply with Catherine. "That's a wonderful story, Aisha," Catherine said. "What made you think of writing about a queen without a crown?" "My Nan always says that real queens don't need crowns to be special," Aisha explained. "She says it's about what's in here." The little girl pointed to her chest. "Not what's on your head." Catherine found herself thinking about that conversation throughout the rest of the day. She had spent so much energy trying to live up to the idea of what a future queen should be that she had lost touch with her own instincts and strengths. That evening, she and William attended a private dinner at the home of James and Sarah Henderson, old friends from their university days who had somehow managed to maintain normal lives despite their royal connections. Being around people who had known them before titles and protocol was both refreshing and challenging. Over dinner, the conversation turned to Sarah's recent experience caring for her father through his battle with Alzheimer's disease. Sarah spoke with characteristic honesty about the difficulty of watching a loved one struggle with illness, about the way serious health challenges can either strengthen relationships or reveal their weaknesses. "The hardest part wasn't the practical stuff," Sarah explained as they sat around the Hendersons' kitchen table. Wine glasses and dessert plates scattered between them. "It was learning to love him differently, to accept that our relationship was changing and find new ways to connect." James nodded. "I remember thinking that Sarah was being so strong, handling everything so well. It took me months to realize that what I thought was strength was actually her way of protecting herself from the grief. When she finally broke down and let me see how scared she was, that's when I could actually help." Catherine felt William's eyes on her across the table. The parallels to their own situation were impossible to ignore. "How did you learn to be vulnerable with each other?" Catherine asked, surprised by her own directness. "Practice," Sarah laughed, but kindly. "And remembering that we were on the same team. I kept thinking I had to handle everything myself because it was my dad. But James reminded me that it was happening to both of us, just in different ways." Later, as they drove back to Kensington Palace, Catherine and William talked about the evening. The conversation with Sarah and James had highlighted something important about their own dynamic that they were just beginning to understand. "I keep forgetting that this is happening to you too," Catherine said quietly. "I've been so focused on my own fear that I haven't thought about what it must be like to watch someone you love go through something like this." "It's terrifying," William admitted, "but not in the way you might think. I'm not just scared of losing you, though that fear is constant. I'm scared of saying the wrong thing, of not being enough, of making it worse somehow." They spent the next hour talking in their car in the palace courtyard, unwilling to end the conversation by going inside. William talked about feeling helpless in the face of something he couldn't fix or solve through royal influence or personal determination. Catherine shared her guilt about bringing this kind of stress into their marriage and their children's lives. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before our wedding?" William asked suddenly. Catherine smiled at the memory. "I said a lot of things. I was pretty nervous. You said you weren't marrying me in spite of the royal stuff, or because of it, but that you were marrying me including all of it. The good parts and the complicated parts and the parts we couldn't even imagine yet." I remember, Catherine said softly. This is one of those parts we couldn't imagine, William said. But the same thing applies. I'm not loving you in spite of this situation or trying to love you around it. I'm loving you including this. Something in the way he said it made Catherine's eyes fill with tears. For months, she had been trying to spare him from the full impact of her situation, to somehow love him around her illness rather than bringing him into it. But what he was offering was something much more profound, not protection from her vulnerability, but inclusion in her whole experience. The next morning brought news that forced their private conversation into a more public realm. Several tabloid newspapers had published photographs of Catherine looking tired and thin, with speculative headlines about her health. The palace press office was fielding dozens of calls from media outlets around the world. Catherine sat in her private secretary's office, looking at the newspaper headlines spread across the desk. Kate's secret health scare, screamed one. Is the Duchess hiding serious illness? Demanded another. The photographs had been taken during public engagements over the past few weeks, carefully selected to support the narrative of a woman struggling with unknown health problems. We need to make a decision about how to respond, Lady Susan said gently. The speculation is only going to get worse if we don't provide some kind of statement. William joined them, having rushed back from a morning engagement when he heard about the media attention. His jaw was tight with anger at seeing Catherine's private struggle turned into entertainment. What do you want to do? He asked Catherine, sitting beside her and taking her hand. Catherine looked at the headlines again, feeling a strange sense of detachment. 3 months ago, this kind of media attention would have sent her into a panic. Today, somehow, it felt manageable. I want to tell the truth, she said suddenly. Not all of it, not the details. But I want to stop hiding. Lady Susan looked surprised. What exactly would you like to say? Catherine thought about Emma's definition of bravery, about Dr. Williams' insights on healing, about Sarah's experience with vulnerability in the face of crisis. She thought about all the people she had met over the years through her charitable work who had faced serious challenges with dignity and openness. I want to say that I'm dealing with a health matter that requires monitoring and treatment, that my medical team is excellent, and that I'm grateful for people's concern but ask for privacy as my family and I navigate this situation. And I want to say that this experience has taught me something important about the strength that comes from being honest about our struggles. Are you sure? William asked quietly. Once you say something publicly, you can't take it back. I'm sure, Catherine said, and she was. I'm tired of being afraid of people knowing that I'm human. The statement was crafted carefully with the press office and released that afternoon. Within hours, the response was overwhelming. Social media filled with messages of support from people sharing their own experiences with health scares and family crises. The carefully worded statement had somehow managed to be both protective of their privacy and authentically human. That evening, as they sat together reading through some of the responses, Catherine felt something shift in her understanding of her public role. For years, she had tried to be an inspiration through perfection, always put together, always smiling, always handling everything with grace. But the response to her honest statement suggested that people found a different kind of inspiration in authentic vulnerability. A letter from a woman in Manchester particularly moved her. The woman wrote about her own recent cancer diagnosis and how isolating it had felt to watch everyone around her try to be positive and strong when what she really needed was for someone to acknowledge that it was okay to be scared. Seeing that even a duchess can be frightened and uncertain makes me feel less alone, the woman had written. Thank you for reminding me that being scared doesn't mean being weak. Reading that letter, Catherine understood something that had been missing from her approach to both her illness and her public role. She had been trying to be strong for others by hiding her struggles, but what people actually needed was to see that it was possible to face difficulties honestly and still find hope and meaning. I think I've been doing this all wrong, she said to William as they prepared for bed. Not just the health stuff, but the royal stuff too. I've been trying to be perfect instead of trying to be real. You've been extraordinary, William said firmly. But I love seeing you like this, more yourself somehow. I feel more myself, Catherine admitted. Scared and uncertain, but more myself. As they turned off the lights, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. 3 months ago, a medical diagnosis had felt like the end of everything she thought she knew about her life. Tonight, it felt more like a beginning. Not of her illness, but of a more honest way of living and loving. She had learned that strength wasn't about hiding her fears from the people who loved her. It was about trusting them enough to share those fears and face them together. Downs. More uncertainty, more questions without easy answers. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt ready to face whatever came next with both courage and honesty. The statement, life had settled into a new rhythm that felt both foreign and natural. The media attention had died down to a manageable level, replaced by a different kind of public engagement with her work. People approached her at events with a warmth that felt more personal than the usual formal respect, sharing their own stories of health challenges and family struggles. Catherine was learning to navigate this new territory carefully, maintaining appropriate boundaries while allowing herself to be more genuinely present in these interactions. The balance wasn't always easy to find, but it felt more authentic than the careful distance she had maintained before. The morning started with a visit to her oncologist, Dr. Richard Sterling, for her regular monitoring appointment. These visits had become routine over the past months, but Catherine still felt her pulse quicken as she walked into the familiar medical office. William had wanted to come with her, but she had asked to go alone this time. It wasn't about excluding him, but about proving to herself that she could handle the medical aspects of her situation independently. She needed to know that her newfound honesty didn't make her dependent on others for strength. Dr. Sterling was a kind man in his early 60s who had a gift for explaining complex medical information in ways that were thorough without being overwhelming. The PI had been treating Catherine since her initial diagnosis, and she had grown to appreciate his straightforward approach and dry sense of humor. "How have you been feeling since we last spoke?" he asked as they settled into his office after her examination. "Better," Catherine said, and realized she meant it. "Not physically necessarily, though I think my energy is improving. But emotionally, mentally, much better." "That's significant," Dr. Sterling said, making notes in her file. "Psychological well-being has a real impact on physical healing. What's changed for you?" Catherine thought about how to explain the shift that had occurred over the past few weeks. "I stopped trying to handle everything perfectly. I started being honest with my husband, and then with the public, about what I was going through. It's made everything feel more manageable somehow." "That makes sense," Dr. Sterling nodded. "Aimed who have the best outcomes is that they find ways to integrate their illness into their life, rather than letting it take over or trying to ignore it completely." They discussed her latest test results, which showed continued stability. The precancerous cells were responding well to treatment, and while vigilant monitoring would continue, there was no indication of progression. It was the best news Catherine could have hoped for, but she found herself responding to it with calm gratitude rather than the overwhelming relief she might have expected. "Dr. Sterling," she said as their appointment was wrapping up, "can I ask you something that might sound strange?"
Of course. In a way, I'm grateful this happened.
"Does that make me crazy?" Dr. Sterling leaned back in his chair, considering her question seriously. "Not at all. I've had many patients express similar feelings. A health scare can be a catalyst for positive changes that people had been avoiding or weren't ready to make. It sounds like this experience has helped you connect more authentically with yourself and your relationships." "Exactly," Catherine said. "I feel like I was sleepwalking through parts of my life before this. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't choose to go through this again, but I'm not sorry about where it's brought me." Leaving the medical office, Catherine felt a lightness that had nothing to do with her test results and everything to do with her growing understanding of herself. She had discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, not in spite of her vulnerability, but because of her willingness to face it honestly. Her next appointment was at a women's shelter in East London, a visit that had been planned before her diagnosis but felt particularly meaningful now. The women staying at the shelter were facing their own versions of uncertainty and fear, often with far fewer resources and support systems than Catherine had access to. As she sat in a circle with a group of women participating in the shelter's counseling program, Catherine found herself sharing more openly than she ever had in such a setting. When one woman expressed feeling ashamed of needing help, Catherine talked about her own struggle to ask for support during her health crisis. "I spent so much time trying to be strong for everyone else that I forgot that asking for help is actually a form of strength," Catherine said. "It takes courage to admit when you're scared or overwhelmed." Maria, a young mother who had left an abusive relationship, looked surprised to hear such honesty from a member of the royal family. "But you always look so together, so perfect. It's hard to imagine you being scared of anything." "That's exactly the problem. Catherine laughed gently. I was so worried about looking like I had everything under control that I almost forgot how to actually deal with things honestly. The conversation continued for over an hour, covering everything from practical strategies for managing anxiety to deeper questions about finding purpose in difficult circumstances. I found herself learning as much as she was sharing, gaining insights from women whose experiences were vastly different from her own, but whose emotional journeys had surprising similarities. Sarah, who had been homeless for 6 months before coming to the shelter, shared her perspective on uncertainty. When you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight, you learn to take things one day at a time, she said. Sometimes 1 hour at a time. It's scary, but it also makes you appreciate small things you used to take for granted. Catherine nodded, thinking about how her health scare had forced her into a similar mindset. The future felt less predictable than it once had, but that uncertainty had also made her more present in daily moments with her family and more grateful for simple pleasures. As the visit concluded, Catherine was approached by Diana, the shelter's director, who had known about Catherine's health situation through her charitable work connections. I hope I'm not overstepping, Diana said quietly, but I wanted to tell you how much your honesty about your own struggles has meant to the women here. When you talk about being scared and needing support, it gives them permission to be human too. It gives me permission to be human too, Catherine replied. That's been the unexpected gift in all of this. Driving back to Kensington Palace, Catherine reflected on the day's conversations. The medical appointment had provided reassurance about her physical condition, but the interactions at the shelter had reinforced something equally important about her emotional and spiritual health. That evening, she and William attended a small dinner party at Clarence House with King Charles and Queen Camilla. It was the first time Catherine had seen her father-in-law since her public statement, and she wasn't sure how he would respond to her decision to be more open about personal challenges. Charles surprised her by bringing up the subject directly over dinner. I wanted to tell you how proud I am of the way you've handled this situation, he said, raising his wine glass slightly in her direction. Finding the balance between privacy and authenticity is one of the most difficult aspects of this life we lead. I'm still figuring it out, Catherine admitted, but it feels more honest than what I was doing before. The monarchy has evolved because people have been willing to find new ways to connect with the public while maintaining the institution's dignity, Charles continued. Your approach, being genuine about struggle while maintaining hope, that's exactly the kind of leadership the monarchy needs in the modern world. Camilla, who had faced her own share of public scrutiny and personal challenges, added her perspective. The public doesn't need us to be perfect. They need us to be human in a way that inspires them to find strength in their own difficulties. The conversation moved to other topics, but Catherine carried those words with her as the evening continued. She was beginning to understand that her illness had taught her something valuable, not just about her personal relationships, but about her public role as well. Later that night, as she and William walked through the palace gardens, Catherine brought up something that had been on her mind since her visit to the shelter. I want to do something with what I've learned, she said. Not just talk about it, but create something that helps other people going through health scares or family crises. What are you thinking, William asked, his interest clearly sparked. A foundation maybe, or a program through one of my existing patronages. Something that focuses on the emotional and psychological support people need when they're facing uncertainty. Not replacing medical care, but addressing the parts that medicine can't fix. The fear, the isolation, the feeling like you have to be strong for everyone else. William stopped walking and turned to face her fully. That's brilliant. You could reach so many people who are struggling with exactly what you went through. We went through, Catherine corrected gently. This happened to both of us, and I think that perspective about how illness affects whole families, not just patients, could be really valuable. They spent the next hour walking and talking, sketching out ideas for what such a program might look like. Catherine envisioned support groups for both patients and family members, resources for children whose parents were facing health challenges, and most importantly, spaces where people could be honest about their fears without being told to stay positive or be strong. I want to create places where it's okay to fall apart, Catherine explained as they sat on a bench overlooking the pond. Because I've learned that falling apart can actually be the beginning of putting yourself back together in a better way. I love that, William said. And I love seeing you like this, so passionate about something that came from your own experience. I feel like I understand my purpose differently now, Catherine said. Before, I thought my job was to be an example of having everything together. Now I think it might be to show people that you can face difficult things honestly and still find hope and meaning. As they made their way back to the palace, Catherine felt a sense of excitement that she hadn't experienced in months. Her health scare had taken away some things. Her certainty about the future, her belief in her own invulnerability, her comfortable distance from life's messier realities. But it had also given her something invaluable. A deeper understanding of herself and a clearer vision of how she wanted to use her position to help others. The night ended with one of their long conversations that had become a regular part of their routine since Catherine's decision to be more honest about her struggles. Precious to both of them, creating an intimacy in their marriage that was deeper and more authentic than what they had shared before. As Catherine fell asleep that night, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been a different person. More guarded, more focused on appearing perfect, more afraid of showing any weakness. The woman she was becoming felt more real, more connected, more purposeful. Her illness had been unwanted and frightening, but it had also been a teacher. It had shown her the difference between strength and perfection, between privacy and isolation, between being an inspiration and being authentic. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued uncertainty, but she felt ready to face them with both courage and honesty, knowing that she didn't have to choose between being strong and being real. The autumn morning was crisp and bright as Catherine stood in the garden of St. Mary's Hospital, preparing for what would be one of the most meaningful public engagements of her royal career. In 6 months, her approach to her role had transformed completely, and today marked the official launch of the Honest Hearts Initiative, a comprehensive support program for families facing medical uncertainty. The program had grown from those late-night conversations with William into something far more substantial than Catherine had initially imagined. Working with medical professionals, psychologists, and families who had experienced serious health challenges, she had helped develop a framework that addressed the emotional and psychological aspects of medical crises that traditional healthcare often overlooked. Dr. Cardiologist Williams, the oncologist from the Children's Hospital where Catherine had first begun to understand her own journey differently, stood beside her as they prepared to tour the new family support center. The space had been designed to feel more like a comfortable home than a clinical environment. With soft seating areas, quiet spaces for private conversations, and rooms where children could play while their parents attended support groups. Williams said quietly as they waited for the official ceremony to begin, "I don't think either of us imagined it would lead to something like this. I don't think I imagined I would ever talk publicly about being afraid," Catherine replied with a smile. "It's strange how the things we're most reluctant to share sometimes turn out to be the most important." The morning's events included presentations from families who had participated in the pilot programs, meetings with medical staff who would be implementing the support services, about the unique emotional challenges faced by different types of families during health crises. One presentation particularly moved Catherine. James and Helen Morrison shared their experience of supporting their teenage daughter through a rare autoimmune condition while also caring for their 8-year-old son, who was struggling to understand why his sister was sick and why his parents seemed scared all the time. "The medical care Lucy received was excellent," Helen explained to the gathered audience, "but nobody talked to us about how to explain uncertainty to our son, or how to maintain our marriage when we were both terrified and exhausted, or how to help Lucy feel normal when everything about our lives had changed." James continued, "When we found out about the pilot program that would become Honest Hearts, we were skeptical. We thought we needed practical help, not emotional support. But it turned out that addressing the emotional stuff actually made everything else more manageable." Their teenage daughter, Lucy, spoke with remarkable poise about her experience. "The hardest part wasn't the physical symptoms or even the treatments," she said. "It was feeling like I was responsible for everyone else's sadness and worry. The family counseling sessions helped all of us understand that it's okay to have different feelings about the same situation." Catherine found herself thinking about her own children as she listened to Lucy speak. Their George, Charlotte, and Louis had known something was wrong during those difficult months, despite her and William's attempts to shield them from the full reality of the situation. The Honest Hearts program included specific resources for children, helping them understand illness and uncertainty in age-appropriate ways. After the presentations, Catherine spent time in the children's area, where art therapy sessions were taking place. Kids whose families were dealing with various medical challenges were working with a trained therapist to express their feelings through painting and drawing. A 10-year-old boy named Marcus showed Catherine his painting, a family portrait where some figures were bright and colorful while others were painted in darker shades. This is my family when my dad was sick, Marcus explained matter-of-factly. The dark parts are the scared feelings. But see how there are still bright parts? Those are the love feelings. My counselor says both feelings can be true at the same time. Catherine knelt down to Marcus's level, studying his painting with genuine interest. That's very wise, Marcus. It took me a long time to learn that lesson. Were you scared when you were sick? Marcus asked with the direct curiosity of childhood. Very scared, Catherine answered honestly. See, but I learned that being scared doesn't mean you can't also be brave or hopeful or loved. As the morning progressed, Catherine participated in an adult support group session, listening as family members shared their experiences and strategies for coping with medical uncertainty. The conversation was facilitated by Amanda Foster, a psychologist who specialized in medical family therapy and had been instrumental in developing the Honest Hearts curriculum. The group included spouses of cancer patients, parents of children with chronic illnesses, adult children caring for aging parents with dementia, and individuals facing their own health challenges. Diversity of situations represented the reality that medical uncertainty touches most families at some point, often in ways that are isolating and difficult to navigate. Robert, whose wife was battling early-onset Alzheimer's disease, spoke about the loneliness of watching someone you love change in ways that feel like losing them gradually. People don't know what to say, so they often say nothing at all, he explained. Or, they offer advice that doesn't really apply to our situation. Sarah, a mother whose son had been born with multiple congenital heart defects, talked about the exhaustion of constantly advocating for her child's medical needs while also trying to maintain normalcy for her other children. I felt like I had to be an expert on everything: medical procedures, insurance systems, special education, when all I really wanted was to just be his mother. Catherine listened to each story with the attention she had learned to give during her own journey. When Dr. Foster invited her to share her perspective, she spoke about her experience of trying to maintain a public role while privately struggling with uncertainty. I thought I had to choose between being honest about my struggles and being effective in my public duties, Catherine said. But this experience has taught me that authenticity and effectiveness aren't opposites. In fact, being honest about facing difficulties has made me more effective, not less. The group discussion continued for over an hour, touching on practical strategies like communication techniques and stress management, but also addressing deeper questions about finding meaning in suffering and maintaining hope when outcomes are uncertain. After the support group session, Catherine met privately with Dr. Foster to discuss the broader implications of what they were seeing in the early implementation of Honest Hearts programs. What surprised you most about the response so far? Catherine asked as they sat in Dr. Foster's office overlooking the hospital garden. The hunger for permission to be human, Dr. Foster replied immediately. So many families have been struggling in isolation, thinking they need to be strong or positive or grateful, when what they really need is space to acknowledge that medical uncertainty is genuinely difficult and scary. That was exactly my experience, Catherine said. I spent months trying to protect everyone else from my fear, when what we all needed was to face it together. Your willingness to share that publicly has given other families permission to be honest about their own struggles, Dr. Foster continued. We're seeing people engage with these support services in ways that might not have happened if they thought they were the only ones struggling. The afternoon brought a different type of engagement, a meeting with policymakers and healthcare administrators about integrating emotional support services more systematically into medical treatment protocols. Catherine had been working with William and their policy advisors to understand how royal influence could be used effectively to advocate for systemic changes in healthcare delivery. The meeting included representatives from the National Health Service, private healthcare providers, mental health organizations, and patient advocacy groups. The discussion focused on practical questions about funding, implementation, and measuring outcomes for family support services. Dr. Richard Sterling, Catherine's oncologist, had agreed to participate in the policy discussion to provide a medical perspective on the value of integrated emotional support services. From a purely clinical standpoint, Dr. Sterling explained to the group, we know that psychological well-being affects physical healing outcomes. Patients who have strong emotional support systems and effective stress management strategies typically have better treatment responses and quality of life measures. Catherine found herself actively participating in the policy discussion in ways that felt natural and informed by her personal experience. She spoke about the gaps she had identified in current support systems and the specific interventions that had been most helpful during her own journey. And we're not trying to replace medical treatment with emotional support, she emphasized. We're trying to recognize that serious illness affects whole people and whole families, not just the specific body systems that are being treated medically. The meeting concluded with commitments from several healthcare organizations to pilot Honest Hearts programs in their facilities and preliminary discussions about potential government funding for expanding family support services. As Catherine left the hospital that evening, she reflected on how different this day felt from her royal engagements of a year ago. Then she had approached public duties as performances where her job was to be gracious and interested but fundamentally separate from the experiences of the people she met. Today had felt more like collaboration. Her own experience with medical uncertainty had given her genuine insight into the challenges faced by other families, and her royal platform had provided the resources and influence to create something meaningful in response to those challenges. After having, William met her at home that evening, eager to hear about the day's events. As they sat together over dinner, Catherine described the conversation she had had and the positive response to the program launch. "I keep thinking about something one of the mothers said today," Catherine told him. She said that the hardest part of her son's illness wasn't the medical uncertainty, but feeling like she had to grieve privately while being publicly grateful for the good medical care they were receiving. "That sounds familiar," William said with a knowing look.
Exactly.
"And I realized that what I thought was my private struggle was actually a very common experience. So many people are trying to balance genuine fear with appropriate gratitude, trying to be honest about difficulty while maintaining hope. And now you're helping them do both," William observed. "We're helping them do both," Catherine corrected. "This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been willing to go through this journey with me, to let me be scared and uncertain and still love me through it." As the evening continued, they talked about the future of the Honest Hearts initiative and Catherine's evolving understanding of her public role. She was beginning to see that her experience with vulnerability and uncertainty had given her a unique perspective on leadership, one that emphasized connection and authenticity over perfection and distance. The day had reinforced something Catherine had been gradually learning over the past months. Her health scare had initially felt like a derailment of her carefully planned life and public role, but it had actually been a redirection toward a more meaningful and effective way of serving others. As they prepared for bed, William brought up something that had been on his mind since Catherine's diagnosis. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said? "How this experience has made our marriage stronger, not weaker. I was so afraid that serious illness would damage our relationship, but somehow it's made us more connected." Catherine smiled, thinking about the journey they had traveled together over the past months. Because we stopped trying to protect each other from difficult emotions and started trusting each other to handle them together. "That seems to be the theme of everything you're doing now," William observed. "Trusting people to handle authentic emotion instead of protecting them from it." As Catherine fell asleep that night, she thought about the transformation that had occurred not just in her personal life, but in her understanding of what it meant to lead and serve others. Her illness had taught her that strength and vulnerability weren't opposites, but partners in creating meaningful change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to put that understanding into practice, but tonight she felt grateful for the unexpected gift that had emerged from her darkest fears. She had discovered that being human publicly was more powerful than being perfect privately, and that authentic leadership required the courage to share both struggles and hope with equal honesty. 1 year after Catherine's diagnosis, she stood in the same hospital corridor where her journey with uncertainty had begun, but everything about the moment felt different. The sterile hallways that had once filled her with dread now felt familiar and purposeful. She was here not as a patient, but as a patron and advocate, attending the graduation ceremony for the first cohort of families who had completed the comprehensive Honest Hearts program. The transformation in her own life had been profound, but seeing the changes in the families who had participated in the program over the past 6 months felt even more meaningful. These were real people whose lives had been genuinely improved by the support system that had grown from her own darkest moments. William walked beside her, carrying a folder of thank you letters from program participants that had arrived at the palace over the past week. Their relationship had continued to deepen throughout this year of growth and change. The crisis that they had both feared would strain their marriage had instead taught them to love each other with a level of honesty and intimacy that neither had imagined possible. Dr. Williams met them at the entrance to the family center, beaming with pride at what had been accomplished in such a short time. The space had evolved beyond its original design with additional rooms for art therapy, family meetings, and peer support groups. Most importantly, it felt alive with the energy of people genuinely helping each other through difficult circumstances. 30. Before we begin the ceremony, Dr. Williams said as they walked toward the main gathering room, I wanted to show you something that's been particularly meaningful to our staff. She led them to a wall covered with photographs and handwritten notes from families who had participated in various aspects of the Honest Hearts program. Each photo showed families at different stages of their medical journeys. But what struck Catherine immediately was the authenticity in their faces. Real emotion, both difficult and joyful, captured honestly. One photograph particularly caught her attention. It showed the Morrison family, whom she had met during the program launch, celebrating their daughter Lucy's first clear medical scan in 2 years. But what made the photo powerful wasn't the good news. It was the way the family was embracing each other with tears in their eyes, allowing themselves to feel both relief and the lingering fear that would always be part of their story. This is what we're really celebrating today, Dr. Williams explained. Not just medical successes, though we've had many of those, but families who have learned to support each other authentically through whatever comes. The graduation ceremony itself was unlike any official event Catherine had ever attended. Instead of formal speeches and protocol, it was structured as a conversation circle where families shared what they had learned and how they planned to use those insights moving forward. Maria Santos, whose husband had been battling a rare neurological condition, spoke first. When we started this program, I thought I was supposed to be positive all the time for my children. I was exhausted from pretending everything was fine, learning that it was okay to be sad and hopeful at the same time. That changed everything for our family. Her teenage daughter Anna added, having a place where we could talk about being scared without anyone telling us not to worry was so important. It helped me understand that taking care of my own emotions was actually a way of helping my dad, not being selfish. Catherine listened to story after story of families who had learned to navigate uncertainty with greater honesty and connection. The practical skills they had developed, communication techniques, stress management strategies, ways to include children in difficult conversations, were important. But what seemed to matter most was the permission they had received to be imperfectly human while facing perfect storms. When it was Catherine's turn to speak, she chose to share something she had never said publicly before, the specific words William had whispered to her in this very hospital a year ago that had changed the direction of her entire approach to crisis. A year ago, I was lying in a hospital bed upstairs, and I felt like I was drowning in fear, Catherine began, her voice steady but emotional. I was trying so hard to be strong for everyone else that I had forgotten how to ask for help from myself. The room was completely silent, families leaning forward to catch every word. My husband came to see me, and I was still trying to pretend I was handling everything fine. I was telling him about my treatment plan and my follow-up appointments, being very practical and composed. And he just looked at me and said 3 words that changed everything. Catherine paused, looking at William across the room. He nodded encouragingly, understanding that she was ready to share this most private moment because it might help others. He said, "Tell me everything. Not it will be okay or you're so strong or don't worry. Just tell me everything." Those 3 words gave me permission to fall apart, to be terrified, to need help. And that permission to be vulnerable was the beginning of actually getting stronger. The silence in the room was profound. Several people were crying, not from sadness, but from recognition. Catherine continued, "What I learned over this past year is that tell me everything isn't just something we say to people we love when they're struggling. It's something we have to be willing to say to ourselves, to acknowledge all of our emotions, the fear and the hope, the anger and the gratitude, the despair and the determination." Dr. Amanda Foster, who had become not just a colleague but a genuine friend over the past months, spoke next about the clinical insights that had emerged from the program. What we've learned from working with Catherine and all of the families here is that resilience isn't about bouncing back to where you were before a crisis, Dr. Foster explained. It's about integrating difficult experiences in ways that actually make you more capable of handling life's inevitable challenges. We've seen families become closer, individuals develop greater emotional intelligence, children learn healthy ways to process uncertainty. The medical crises that brought people to this program were genuinely difficult, but the growth that occurred in response has been remarkable. The ceremony concluded with each family sharing one commitment they were making to continue applying what they had learned. The commitments ranged from practical goals like weekly family check-ins to broader intentions like choosing honesty over perfectionism in daily life. The event ended and families mingled over refreshments. Catherine found herself in conversation with Emma, the 7-year-old girl from the children's ward who had given her the glittery princess card a year ago. Emma was now 8 and had been declared cancer-free for 6 months, but she and her family had participated in the Honest Hearts program to help process the emotional aftermath of her treatment. "I remember you," Emma said with the confidence of a child who had faced serious challenges and emerged stronger. "You're the princess who learned to be brave." "I remember you too," Catherine replied, kneeling down to Emma's level. "You're the girl who taught me what brave really means." "My mom says you made a program to help other families like ours," Emma said. "That's really good. Some kids at school have sick parents or grandparents, and they don't know how to talk about it." Catherine was struck by Emma's matter-of-fact wisdom. This child, who had faced more medical uncertainty than most adults, was already thinking about how to help others navigate similar challenges. "What would you tell those kids at school?" Catherine asked. "I'd tell them it's okay to be scared and that grown-ups get scared too," Emma answered immediately. "And I'd tell them that talking about scary things actually makes them less scary." As the afternoon wound down, Catherine and William walked back through the hospital corridors where this journey had begun. The physical space was the same, but Catherine's relationship to it had been completely transformed. What had once felt like a place of fear and uncertainty now felt like a place of learning and connection. "Do you remember what you were thinking about when you said those 3 words to me?" Catherine asked William as they paused outside the room where she had received her initial diagnosis. "I remember feeling desperate to reach you," William said. "You seemed so far away, even though you were right there. I didn't know what else to say except to ask you to let me in completely." "Those words saved me," Catherine said simply. "Not from the medical situation, but from the isolation I was creating around myself." "They saved me too," William replied. "I was drowning in my own fear about how to help you. When you finally told me everything, I realized I didn't have to fix anything. I just had to be present for whatever you were feeling." As they left the hospital that evening, Catherine reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. A year ago, she would never have imagined that a medical crisis would become the foundation for some of the most meaningful work of her royal career, or that learning to be vulnerable would make her more effective as a leader. The drive back to Kensington Palace took them through central London, past the places where she had carried out countless royal engagements over the years. Catherine thought about how different her approach to public service felt now. Instead of trying to be an inspiration through perfection, she was learning to be helpful through authenticity. That evening, as they sat with their children after dinner, Catherine found herself appreciating the ordinary moment in ways she might not have before her health crisis. George was working on homework, Charlotte was reading, and Louis was building an elaborate castle with blocks. The scene was completely normal, but Catherine's ability to be present for it had been transformed by her journey through uncertainty. "Mummy?" Charlotte looked up from her book. "My teacher said you help families when someone is sick." "I try to help families talk to each other when they're scared," Catherine replied carefully. "When people we love are sick, sometimes we don't know what to say to each other." "Like when you were sick and Daddy looked worried all the time?" George asked, demonstrating the perceptiveness that constantly surprised his parents. "Exactly like that," Catherine said, exchanging a look with William. "We learned that it's better to talk about being worried than to pretend everything is fine." "That makes sense," Charlotte said matter-of-factly. "When I'm worried about something and I tell you, I usually feel better." Later that night, as Catherine and William prepared for bed, they talked about the day's events and the broader changes that had occurred in their lives over the past year. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gotten that diagnosis?" William asked. "If we had just continued on the path we were on." Catherine considered the question seriously. "I think we would have been fine, even. But I don't think we would have learned what we learned about ourselves and each other. And I definitely wouldn't have understood my public role the way I do now." "I feel the same way," William said. "It's strange to be grateful for something that was so frightening at the time." "I think that's what resilience actually is," Catherine replied, thinking about Dr. Foster's insights from earlier in the day. not avoiding difficult experiences, but finding ways to let them teach you something valuable. As she fell asleep that night, Catherine thought about the words that had started this transformation. Tell me everything. Those three simple words had given her permission to be human in ways she had never allowed herself before. They had taught her that strength came not from hiding weakness, but from trusting others with the full truth of her experience. The medical uncertainty that had brought her to this point was largely behind her, but the lessons she had learned would continue to shape her life and work for years to come. She had discovered that authenticity was more powerful than perfection, that vulnerability could be a form of leadership, and that the moments when we feel most broken can become the foundation for our greatest growth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Catherine felt ready to meet them with the wisdom she had gained from learning to tell everything, to herself, to the people she loved, and to the world she served. The secret words that had changed everything weren't really secret at all. They were an invitation available to anyone brave enough to accept it. The invitation to be completely, authentically, courageously human.